This podcast contains our own personal views, not associated with any organisation. Coronial contains descriptions of death inquests that may be graphic and disturbing to some listeners. Discretion is advised.
Welcome back to Coronial. I'm Alice.
I'm Georgie.
And I'm Emma. And today we're going to be looking at the case of Holly Brown. Holly Winter Brown was the daughter of Warren and Elle Brown and sister to William. She was 17 when she attended the annual Laura Rodeo and Races weekend in June 2015 with her family and family friends. So for reference, the town of Laura is in far North Queensland. It's about 300 kilometres north of Cairns, so quite rural.
I totally skipped what you were saying and thinking Laura was a family member.
Laura's a town.
Laura's a town.
Laura's a town. Yep, small town. 300 kilometres north of Cairns. So during this annual rodeo and races event, the population of the town increases from approximately 80 people to approximately 2,000 or more people. So it's huge, so really small town, and then also a huge influx of people coming into the town for this annual event.
Okay.
So the local health clinic employed 2 nurses, and it was resourced to provide limited emergency care and health care. So that would be treatment for minor injuries and illnesses, basic resuscitation, and limited stabilisation. So they would, if they had complex cases, they would transfer to, I think it was Cooktown Hospital. So they would transfer them there.
Okay.
The health service responsible for the local clinic contracted an additional agency nurse to provide first aid at the event and also to back up QAS in case they needed backup. So 2 clinic nurses plus they employed an additional one for the event.
I mean, even so, I'm still thinking of like an 80 people population. How many nurses could there have been around, or ambulance officers? So that, I don't know. I think that's not unreasonable.
Yeah. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
So on the Friday night, so June the 26th, Holly was hanging out with her friends at a campsite near where her family was camped. Her parents collected her at about 2 a.m. on Saturday morning to go back to their campsite for the night. So when she woke up at about 6 a.m. the next morning, being June 27th, Holly was feeling unwell. She had a sore back and she was vomiting. Her father gave her some Panadol around 7 a.m. and suggested she go lie down and rest. She got up at one point and told her mother she had some chest pain before lying down again. When her father checked on her at approximately 8:30 a.m., she was unresponsive and her breathing was shallow. Her father called for help and started CPR at that point.
So, yeah, unresponsive, like needed to start CPR. She's
okay. not doing well. And it was quite a rapid decline as well, seeing as she was up at about an hour and a half before.
Yeah, right.
And now sort of all of a sudden she's unresponsive.
Okay.
They need to start CPR.
Yep.
So some people were trying to call the local health clinic by mobile, but they weren't able to get through. And the town had a sort of a notoriously bad phone connection. Like it was hard often for people to make calls.
Can't imagine living in a town where I couldn't make it.
Yeah, but that's all right. That's all right. So nearby campers took some quad bikes and went into the rodeo arena and racecourse, thinking there would be some paramedics there for the horse events that were on that morning. Unfortunately, there were no paramedics on site. So an announcement was made over the PA for medical assistance. So to see if anyone who was attending the event was medically trained and could help out.
Yeah, okay.
There were also reports of campers going around on foot or on horseback trying to find medical assistance, like people like scattered throughout the event trying to find someone who could help.
But also, yes, on horseback. Amazing.
Yeah, like isn't that just so typical of like a country town?
So country.
And like there's got a whole bunch of horse events at this
true.
At this event as well.
Okay.
Like there are horses around, like people have horses. And it's quicker than going on foot.
Fair.
Campers started dismantling structures to allow emergency services access because it's a campground. There's lots of tents, wags, camper vans, I would assume. There probably wasn't much access at that point, so they started taking things down so they could actually get people ambulances through and that sort of thing.
Yep.
So a camper went to find the first aid nurse who was posted at the grounds for the morning events, but the first aid station was unattended. It took approximately 5 minutes for the nurse to approach the camper because the camper was sort of around that area saying, you're calling out, where's the first aid nurse? We need your help. And it took about 5 minutes for the nurse to hear them. This nurse was the agency nurse who was contracted by the health service as she was on site that morning.
So maybe her knowledge of what's around the stuff is not going to be as good as the others, but I guess it depends where she was from and how much time she'd spent in this place.
Yeah, but I'm not sure how long she had been in that area or whether she was just deployed for the day or the weekend. So while the camper was finding the first aid nurse, a nearby off-duty triage emergency department nurse was told of the scene and she arrived to help. Now, being an emergency department nurse, she was pretty well trained with CPR and that sort of thing. So she examined Holly, who was pale and sweaty with shallow breathing and a weak radial pulse. So not in a good way. Holly went into cardiac arrest at about 9:10 a.m. That was soon after the off-duty nurse had arrived. And that off-duty nurse took over CPR and also took control over the scene as well because she knew what she was doing. At about 9:35 a.m., so after 20 minutes of doing CPR, with no help or equipment available, this off-duty nurse requested a QPS escort to the health clinic so that she could get some supplies, some drugs, anything that would help. She passed the clinic troop carrier on her way out, so turned around to go back because the two nurses from the clinic were on their way in because they had been contacted. So she left to go get equipment and help, but on her way out, she saw that they were coming in, so she's like, okay, we'll just turn around and come back.
But whether they had equipment with them is still unclear.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. She's just like, well, troop carrier's there. It'll have stuff in it.
Oh, troop carrier. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It'll have the supplies. It was sort of like the clinic ambulance. Yeah. It wasn't actually an ambulance, but it had supplies. Supplies.
So this off-duty nurse, she's from out of town.
I am sure. So she
was probably at the rodeo.
Yeah, she was just there
as a patron,
as a spectator. Yeah, and she just happened to be in the right place at the right time, sort of thing. So the first 000 call was made at 9:40 a.m. by a nearby camper. The mobile phone connection was so poor that the 000 calls were dropping out, and they were not able to communicate very effectively with the 000 dispatcher. So QAS was deployed by road under a Code 1 lights and sirens, and the care flight helicopter was deployed from Cairns. Now, this delay in the 000 call was attributed to the confusion at the scene. So I think there were a lot of people around. Everyone's stressed. Everyone's, worried. Lots of people. They're all trying to find help. Everyone's running everywhere. Like just totally
assuming
chaotic.
Someone else called 000.
But also, if you're in a really rural place, you don't really normally have ambulances, right? So how effective do they think that an ambulance call is going to be?
Yeah. And the other thing as well is that there was an assumption that an ambulance was already on site for the horse events that morning. So it's sort of like, we've put the announcement over the PA. They're going to hear that and come. We don't necessarily need to call 000 because they're probably already coming. By the time those people on quad bikes came back, they were like, well, there's no paramedics in sight. Okay, now we need to call 000. There was a reasonable delay in calling 000, but it is explained by the fact that confusion, bad mobile connection. It's all sorts of confusion. So the first aid nurse arrived on the scene just before 10 a.m. She made another call to 000 and advised that this was a serious emergency and that a helicopter was needed. She gave GPS coordinates for the location of a landing zone in the middle of the racetrack. So she was sort of able to give a bit more information on what was happening than the first person who called, who was just a member of the public. So nurses from the local health clinic, who at the time were on fatigue leave after working a double shift.
Oh, no.
They arrived at 10 a.m. in the clinic's troop carrier, which had an AED, adrenaline and oxygen.
Okay.
So they had some...
all of the things.
Yep, good. The trigger for their deployment from the clinic or from their houses where they were trying to sleep was direct communication from a member of the public to one of the nurses' mobile phones, not the 000 call centre.
Yes. So at least their reception was working. But I guess it's a small community. Though.
Yeah.
So everyone would have known everyone.
Call the health clinic. Yeah, that's what you're used to doing.
Yeah.
But I guess the problem there is that did the 000 call centre know, did they have direct access to the health clinic?
To know what was available, what was going on.
Potentially
not. Probably not.
Yeah. So the AED was applied but registered a non-shockable rhythm to start with, and oxygen and adrenaline were given. A shockable rhythm was then detected and 1 shock was administered. There was fluid in Holly's airways, but no portable oxygen/suction was available because they didn't have any in the troop carrier. Another off-duty nurse who was present was escorted to the health clinic by QPS to collect the equipment, returning 15 minutes later. So no airway support equipment was present until after 10 a.m, and even then it was not fit for purpose. So the one they had, it wasn't really doing a very good job. And a patent airway was never established.
Okay.
Time.
Which we know is going to be very unhelpful.
Yes. Need oxygen in.
Yeah, even though it is needed, they're pumping oxygen in. If it's not actually going anywhere, it's just dissipating to the air.
So QAS paramedics arrived at approximately 11 a.m. That was after being assigned the job at 9:41 a.m. So that gives you an idea of the distances. Where
did they come from? There. Cairn? No, that's too far.
I'm not sure where they came from.
Presumably the next hospital, which would be whatever the next.
I think that would be
Cooktown. I'm just going to Google. Okay, yeah, sure.
I think it would be Cooktown because that's
the closest major
hospital.
Yeah.
The other thing, they were delayed on arrival because there was only one access to the grounds and there was no one there to meet them or to escort them to where they needed to go. So they turn up yep, cool, we've been assigned this job, we're here.
Oh no.
Where do we go? We can't get, there's only one point to get in, so that's probably quite busy because they had events on that morning.
Yeah. And 2,000 people, so I'm sure there was lots of scattered.
Yeah, and
what's going on.
And it's a campsite, so there's campers everywhere, tents everywhere.
Has the rodeo still going?
I'm honestly not sure. Potentially they had horse events that morning, so they might have still been continuing.
No idea.
Yeah.
Well, apparently there is a hospital in Laura. It looks like this.
That looks like a house.
I'm guessing that says it's a public hospital.
I'm guessing that's the health clinic.
I think that's the health clinic. Yeah, it's a hospital.
Okay.
It doesn't look like a house.
It's not somewhere that's going to have an ambulance attached to it, is it?
No, I don't think so. But it does say it's 24-hour accident and emergency.
Yeah, and that's at that time, 2 nurses.
Yeah,
were their accident and emergency.
Okay.
Department. So the care flight helicopter arrived at approximately 11:15 a.m. So that's 2 hours after her cardiac arrest. The resuscitation efforts provided to Holly were unfortunately insufficient to revive her, and Holly was declared deceased at the scene at 11:44 a.m. by the care flight doctor.
Which, 2 hours of CPR with an ineffective airway.
Yeah.
That's not going to have a good survival outcome, even if they had been able to get good output again.
Yeah.
And how old was Holly? Sorry.
She was 17. Yep, so very young for this sort of thing.
Yes.
So the most probable cause of her death was found to be an arrhythmia as a consequence of undiagnosed heart scarring, most likely from past rheumatic fever. So very rare and not something you would expect to happen acutely in a 17-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So just putting that out there, it is a very rare condition that she had. And I think the coroner does say that even if everything was in place properly, she still may not have survived. But the fact is that she may have, if there was an appropriate response
and
plan in place.
This case certainly highlights the fact that there were still 2,000 people. So just because Holly happened to be 17 and the chance of her having any significant illness is rare because she's still essentially a child.
Yeah.
And most children don't have arrhythmias and have arrests like that. I'm sure that there were other elderly people attending the rodeo or people with other medical conditions or anything that could have had an unexpected need for medical services.
Yeah, well, that's right. Even the fact that it was a rodeo, there are injuries.
Yeah,
rodeos.
True.
It's a dangerous sport.
Head injuries are certainly something that very, easily and could have had very significant outcomes. Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, that's what happened. Okay. Now we'll go into what went wrong.
Well, now that happened things already.
Yes, I'm sure you have identified some red flags already. So clearly the nursing staff and staffing numbers were too small, considering the clinic was the first responder service for approximately 2,000 people. And yes, included in those 2,000 people were probably elderly people, people with medical conditions.
I'm trying to think of other big events though, like what their standard, like, thoughts, if you go to music festivals and stuff, how much health support do they have? I don't really know. So
I'm not sure.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. And it's probably because the two health nurses weren't normally catered to the town.
Yeah, exactly.
So that is what it is.
Yeah.
It's about 80 people rather than 2,000.
Yeah. And they did have QAS on site for some of the events. So like the rodeo events, the ones that were going to be more high risk, they did have QAS on site. But I'll go into in a little bit.
But also interesting that those two, primary nurses for the town are also on fatigue leave.
Yes.
Like, should have they pre-planned?
Yeah, they should have alternated.
Rested and ready to go for a big event where there are 2,000 people in the town?
Yeah, so interesting with the alternating thing. So in the report, they talk about that. And so essentially it used to be that when a nurse was on call at night, they would go by themselves. That was changed because, you don't necessarily want one nurse going by themselves out to a call at night. So they changed it so that they would always have both of them going on call outs. Like during the clinic hours, I think they would have shifts, but in call outs, they would both go.
Okay.
So because there's only two of them,
they just need staff. They need at least 4.
Yeah, they need a lot more then.
Yeah. So there was no adequate contingency plan for nurses on fatigue leave that weekend.
Yep.
And there was also no emergency vehicle on site to transport Holly to the clinic.
So no ambulance. So
no ambulance, no.
Yeah. Queensland Ambulance Service QAS had been planned to be there. Does it just mean they didn't happen to be there at the time that she arrested?
Yeah, so they were there for some of the events, but not for the horse events that were on that morning.
Okay.
So they were there for some of the weekend, but not all of the weekend.
Yeah. Okay. That was the lower risk events.
Yes.
Okay.
Still risky, I would say.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Sure. Off a horse.
Nope. Yeah. Nope. So the first aid nurse who had been assigned to the event, she was assigned as a first aid nurse only and as a backup for the QS if required. She only had access to a basic first aid kit on site, and there was no satellite phone that was provided to her.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, especially with that reception, that would have been something much simpler to have provided than risk not being able to contact emergency services.
Yeah, and even just the fact that she only had a basic first aid kit. Even with all of her training, there's not that much she can do sometimes if you've got Band-Aids and saline. That's not going to help. So when she attended the grounds on Friday afternoon, she realised the QAS weren't present for the afternoon horse events and was told by an organiser that because the events were organised by different groups, that QAS was only attending the higher risk events.
Okay.
Yeah. So she also didn't know that there wasn't going to be QAS on site at all times.
Oh, that's really unhelpful for her. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So she's then put in that position of, well, I need to be here, but I have no equipment. I have no backup.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And until she arrived on Saturday morning, she was unaware that she would be the only medical person on site.
Oh, that's
so when she arrived,
communication to her.
Yeah. So when she arrived on the Friday afternoon, she realised, QAS isn't present, and was told, they'll only be here for the higher risk events.
Oh.
She turns up on Saturday morning. Oh,
you're it.
Yeah, I am responsible for the medical well-being of 2,000 people.
Oh, okay, no worries.
Yeah, so with a first aid kit. That's it.
With a small first aid kit. Excellent.
So from an exchange between one of the clinic nurses and the secretary of the Laura Rodeo and Campdraft Association, the LRCDA. So they were one of the organisers of some of the events.
Yep.
It was clear that the LRCDA considered the cost of having QAS on site very expensive for the club. And so they were trying to find alternative ways to cover the events. And that included contacting a private service and posting a request for assistance on Facebook.
Oh, okay, wait. Facebook is not my first place that I go to find medical services.
No.
Generally?
No.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
So arrangements for an on-site medical presence for Saturday the 27th were not in place 10 days before the event.
Oh, okay.
So this was left totally
Really
until the last minute because they didn't want to employ QAS because it was too expensive. So I think it was like a first aid company that they had contacted, and then they also took to Facebook to see if anyone in the area or who would be going was a nurse and would be happy to.
Right, so potentially that first aid nurse was just someone that happened to be attending, and she's like, sure, I'll pick up some employment.
Yeah, and it turned like she was actually employed by the clinic, thankfully, but
okay.
that club was
not
organising it. Yeah, their medical presence well.
This makes me feel like there's some sort of legal requirement for medical services at these sort of large events. I don't know if that's the case, but
it seems like it.
It seems like,
right?
Yeah,
I think at the time there wasn't.
There wasn't, but they were still scrambling.
Yeah, like this definitely should have been in place far before then, but there was no prosecution that occurred as part of this case.
Yeah, so again, it's not like specific legislation that's addressing that at this point in time.
Yeah.
You would think there would be, though.
There might be now.
Yeah.
But wait, going back though, this rodeo is something that's held every year?
Yep, every year.
And has been, it wasn't the first year or it wasn't like the first events or anything like that. Like they're still learning.
Yeah, it's been going on for at least a couple of years.
What have they been doing the years prior?
Well, I will go
elaborate on that. Okay.
The other years were better.
Okay. Yeah. This is
a bit of an anomaly.
Yeah. Right.
When it comes to their planning. And also, well, you wouldn't necessarily have known before then how good or bad the plan was if nothing happened.
Exactly. Like maybe they thought in the previous years, well,
yeah,
there's not been any arrests at this place for 10 years.
Yeah.
Can we start scaling back? Why do we keep having QAS? They're really expensive.
Yep.
Oh, that's devastating.
Yep. So the first aid nurse had no adequate on-site backup. The two clinic nurses were second on call for this first aid nurse. But at the time, as I said, were on fatigue leave, having been on duty for almost 24 hours.
Oh, that's devastating for them. They would have been so exhausted when then at an actual really significant emergency.
Yep. And that's part of what contributed to sort of the confusion on scene, because these two nurses had been on call and on duty for so long, had just been trying to get some rest, and then they're sort of thrown into this cold, straight, crazy scene of, So, and also, despite being on fatigue leave, they were still expected to be on call.
That makes no sense. You're on leave because you're fatigued, but yet you're still expected to go out to an emergency situation if needed. That's ridiculous. No person can work at their optimal,
especially if they're looking after other people.
Yeah, I just don't think that's acceptable.
So a little bit more sort of information on their 24 hours on duty. So at the end of their day shift on Friday, the 26th of June, the two clinic nurses completed 2 return trips to Cooktown Hospital. So the first were from 6:30 p.m. to 11 p.m, and the second was from 1:30 a.m. on the Saturday the 27th to 6:30 a.m. And that involved a total of 600 kilometres of driving within 12 hours.
So they were doing significant travel and significant work that meant that they were, wouldn't have, it wasn't like they were just sitting in a clinic waiting around.
No, they were on duty all day and then, had 2 call-outs. And there wasn't much time between the two of them, like coming back at 11 p.m. and then the second one's at 1:30. You're getting, maybe an hour of sleep if you did go to sleep.
Yeah.
You could have gotten to sleep.
And that's, interesting that, does that mean that was typical of those rodeos that they were, or of the time in the town?
It's hard to tell. Yeah, it's hard to tell. I don't think the 2 cases were related to the rodeo. I think it was just...
Right, so they were still on call for the rest of the town?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're still on call for the rest of the population there.
Yeah, obviously. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Right.
So because they'd worked the day shift and then had 2 call-outs in one night, they determined that it was best for the first aid nurse to attend the events on Saturday morning, which makes a lot of sense because they've been working for 24 hours.
Absolutely.
And yeah, they needed to rest. So one of these nurses was employed at the clinic for 5 weeks, during which she only had 3 days off.
3 days off and 5
So she's like excessively fatigued, not even just like 24
Yeah,
hours.
not just you've worked a long day. This is you've worked a long 5 weeks.
Oh, she was not going to stay in that job for very long, was she?
Well, yeah, so she was there on a 3-month contract, but decided to terminate it after 5 weeks due to the issues at the clinic to do with fatigue leave.
Wow.
So the issues that led to her terminating that contract included there were minimal breaks while on fatigue leave, as calls to the QAS would still be diverted to her on-call phone. There were only ever 2 nurses posted at the clinic. However, 2 nurses were required to attend all call-outs.
Right.
And there were also issues with the equipment in the vehicles not being fit for purpose.
Such as the one that they needed for Holly on the day.
Yeah.
Oh, that's devastating.
Yeah. So, yes, after 5 weeks of that, I totally understand not wanting to continue in that situation.
The 3 months. Yeah, right.
So the other clinic nurse stopped her 1-month contract at the clinic after Holly's death. So the reasons being nil fatigue management structure, a lack of support for equipment and safety, and an excessive workload. The communication from management around the staffing for the rodeo was confusing, with multiple different instructions in emails from multiple different people sort of in management at the clinic.
And when you sort of started this, you were saying, oh, there's 2 local nurses, and I'm thinking, oh, great, like they know what's going on in the town and what's the local resources. But realistically, no, they both worked there for like
they're not from the town.
No, they're not from the town. They haven't worked there that long.
Yep. It's not like they'd been there for 20 years or something like that.
It sounds like they wouldn't know what resources are available because they'd basically not stopped working in that month. But still.
Yeah, and this is complete conjecture, but going into being a nurse, going to a rural town, I would assume they're probably also quite young, generally, or is that?
I think it would depend. I don't know that you can.
Yeah, it's somewhat to say that. I imagine, I agree that a lot of the rural travel may be more appealing to single individuals that have no family ties, but. It doesn't sound like this job had the ability to fly in, fly out, but sometimes fly in, fly out jobs might be more appealing to
a broader
range of people.
Yeah.
I think there was something in there about one of the nurses who did have a couple of days off. It was only because her mother was in hospital. And so she went to go and she went to go and visit her mum.
So it wasn't even like, there, your 3 days off. That was, oh, cool. Like, I have to take leave now. Oh, that's so bad for these people.
And it kind of continues. So the director of nursing at the clinic was there temporarily for the 6-day period, which covered the week leading up to and including this weekend event. This 6-day period, like a temporary contract, was because the current director was on annual leave and the relieving director didn't start immediately. So there was a 6-day gap in between the sort of substantive director going on annual leave and the acting, relieving director coming on. So they needed someone there for 6 days.
So on a side note, so the director totally leaves at the time of the rodeo every year and has annual leave over the rodeo so that they don't have to deal with 2,000 people influxing their town.
Look, potentially, I don't know if they had it every year, but that particular year
plan.
Yeah.
I'd be like, no. Not dealing with that.
Yeah. Thank you, bye. So there was also confusion for the temporary director as to the role of the first aid nurse and the equipment needed. Because you're coming into this, you've really had who knows what standover you've had, and you're just like, oh, wait, what's happening? What are they doing? What do they need? Like, if they're told, oh, the first aid nurse just needs first aid kit, they'd be like, okay, cool, that's enough. They've got the first aid kit.
Yeah, right.
So there were no formal guidelines or policy for appropriate protocols in terms of responsibilities for event planning and risk assessment for a mass gathering of this kind. Mm-hmm. So while preparedness and response management plans were completed in 2013 and 2014, there wasn't one done in 2015, which is the year that this happened. So apparently the plan wasn't completed as originally the executives had decided not to hire a third nurse. So everything would be business as usual. So they didn't need a plan because they weren't hiring any additional staff. It would just be everyone does their job as normal.
Yeah, no, I disagree with that in terms of like, but you've had a, significant increase in your general population.
Yep.
Yeah, anyway.
Yeah. Also, the current director of nursing at the clinic only became aware of the third nurse being hired shortly before he went on leave.
Because they hadn't actually hired anyone.
Yeah.
Like shortly before they went on leave.
Exactly. So I think they were the person who normally did the plans, and they didn't actually know there was going to be a third person until just before they went on leave.
Okay.
So never in any of their previous preparedness plans was there a provision for additional equipment. So they would just go with the equipment that they had in the clinic, essentially.
And again, was that because they previously had QAS and so the equipment was actually coming from them? Okay.
Yeah, but they didn't have any extra equipment than what QS might provide, which
is still going to be an extra lot on top of what they had, but still, may not.
Still not necessarily enough for 3,000 people. So there were 2 associations involved in the events that weekend, and they were individually responsible for the medical coverage of their events. So there wasn't any sort of discussion between them necessarily. They weren't jointly responsible. They were just like, my association's doing this event, I'm taking care of it.
So as in, you mean like the rodeo side versus the horse events?
Yeah.
They each came with their own plan and didn't actually communicate with each other.
Correct, yeah. And there was no need for them to communicate with each other or
debatable.
Well, yes. To them, there was no need to, because they would do them separately.
I'm just thinking it's very interesting that they cover the event but are not covering the spectators.
Or anyone else involved. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, that's it. It's just, because they're only organising the event. They're not organising the spectators.
Yeah, so who's organising the spectators?
Yeah,
there must be someone. Or is it just a free event that, like, it's on and so you can camp in these grounds?
Yeah.
But again, also, like, very narrow-minded of the, like, well, this is my bit. That's all I'm contributing.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's hard. Yeah. So as the coroner states, basic resources such as an AED and adrenaline were not available on site for at least 45 to 50 minutes after Holly's cardiac arrest, meaning that her chances of survival were almost nil. Like, that's a long time to be doing CPR and not having any additional drugs on board, anything else.
Yeah. I don't know what's standard for events like this that should be available, but I would have thought a first aid kit would have had some consideration for cardiac arrest medication.
Yeah, you would assume there would be an AED.
Yeah,
in because now there's AEDs in shopping centres.
Yeah, right, they're everywhere. It's compulsory to have them. Offices and things like that.
Yeah, they're more recent now, and I guess out rurally maybe because that's very suburban for them to be available everywhere. So I guess I don't know whether out rurally that's as common, but I would have thought a first aid kit for a big event would have had consideration for medications. More than just Panadol, Nurofen and a Band-Aid.
Yeah. Which I guess they're probably like, well, that's in the clinic.
Yeah.
It's there.
True.
It's available. It's just not
But it also looks like my Googling that the clinic isn't actually like, and I might be wrong, but it's not like Laura's very rural, obviously, but it looks fairly spread out.
Well, they said 15 minutes for them to go collect meds. Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. So Holly's parents advocated for an enforceable regulatory framework applicable to mass gathering events in Queensland, such as this one, to ensure an appropriate medical response. And this became referred to as Holly's Law.
Oh, cool.
So the coroner recommended that within 6 months, an interagency executive group be convened to consider reform for mass gathering events, and specifically to create a standard protocol for an out-of-hospital emergency at the annual Laura Rodeo and Race event.
So is this kind of looking at design just for Laura, or are they trying to make it more applicable statewide?
That one was specific to that Laura event.
Yep.
Yeah. So that protocol would include effective communication, access for emergency services to the grounds, resources and staffing, and approval process for the event organisers so that, they could communicate with each other they could have an overall plan for the event, not just individual associations doing individual things.
That sounds much better.
Yep. So that was coroner's recommendation, and yeah, that's Holly's law.
It's nice to see that come out of it, and I guess that those parents were able to advocate so well for her in terms of that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, very sad and devastating, and them trying to make something come good of it is really nice that they can make sure that it doesn't happen to other families in the future.
Yeah. And just awful for those parents having to.
It just seems like such a tragic set of circumstances. And it's also like a little bit like Murphy's Law, like the one time that you don't put a plan in place, that's obviously when something's going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's just sad that happened in this case.
Yeah.
And it seems like even if the previous events did have plans in place, were they necessarily any good? Like, yeah, they had a plan in place, but did they, incorporate all of those things? Communication, resourcing, staffing.
I'm also just thinking of those poor parents watching their daughter have 2.5 hours worth of resuscitation because you can't call it, or people may have been reluctant to call it until there was adequate services available, such as that helicopter rescue flight coming in.
Yeah.
And that's 2 hours is a very, very long time to continue working on someone to try and resuscitate them.
And also I think like it'd be very exhausting for the personnel doing that as well. I'm thinking Laura, far North Queensland, heat, sweaty.
Yeah, I mean, it's winter, but still hot.
Still be
like into June, but it would still be very hot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's never really cold there, right?
Yeah.
And I also imagine, like, you know, that was in the campsite. Did they, I guess it didn't describe, but like whether they moved her or whether that was just all on the ground?
I think it was all on the ground, like in the dirt. Yeah. You know, I don't think they moved her at all.
Yeah.
So I don't think they really could. Like they didn't have any facilities necessarily to be able to move her.
Yeah. And so that would have just been added to the difficulty of the accessibility of everything they were doing for her.
Yeah. So I'm just doing a bit more reading. So in 2016, so they'd spent about a year lobbying for the introduction of Holly's Law. So her parents, which would mean councils across the state would need to have certain plans in place before having these large events. But I can't necessarily see that it's been sort of turned into any legislation yet,
or
at this point.
But at least
I would assume that individual event would have these plans in place going forward.
Yes.
And hopefully it can serve as a learning opportunity for other large events, especially in rural areas, that they do have plans in place and appropriate staff.
And I guess the more that they get it out there, the more that those other rural places might adopt it and look at the potentials of what they may need and what may be the best way to source it and staff it. And maybe if they come up with regulations and guidelines, those can be adapted for various other events.
Yeah.
Yeah, use as a template.
Yeah.
For other sort of similar events in rural areas.
And hope that other management companies and structures choose to uptake that because they, hopefully they can see the benefit of that.
Yeah.
Rather than risk just out of a cheaper resourcing option, which money's always going to come into it, but it's horrible when that means that adequate resources can't be provided.
Yeah, because I guess the QS, I assume, would have had things on hand to be able to help a lot better.
Absolutely. I would have thought that they would be able to just even extra sets of hands.
Yeah, and trained. There was actually, so I think there were 2 off-duty nurses there. There was also an off-duty student paramedic as well that was helping, but obviously with no equipment, there's only so much that you can do.
Yeah, it means they could rotate through her resus, but that if the CPR is literally the only thing they can provide, and oxygen, which is not really going anywhere anyway.
Yeah. So the Queensland government have a response sort of document that they put out to say, from this inquest, this is what we're putting into place.
Nice.
I just proposed this will be an integrated effort led by the Department of Health with the Torres and Cape Hospital and Health Service and the QAS in conjunction with QPS, Queensland Fire and Emergency Service, and other stakeholders. So consideration will be given to the following possible approaches. So utilisation of existing established committees, which would make sense because they're already there, or establishment of 2 intra-agency executive level committees. So a state level committee responsible for a development of a set of guidelines for medical care at mass gathering events statewide. So sort of a template for all mass gathering events to use. And also a local level committee to actually do the operational side of things in terms of who will be there, what equipment will be there, and that sort of thing.
That sounds awesome, because I certainly know that there's definitely the need for that at other mass gatherings.
Yeah.
The examples being, the obvious one being music festivals that I know that there's definitely coroner's cases we're going to want to cover. That have had equally as devastating outcomes when they've been under-serviced by first aid and healthcare providers.
So it looks like there was the Cookshire Mass Gathering Executive Committee was established at the local level, and that includes representation from sort of a whole bunch of health services and QAS and also the event organisers. The committee conducted its inaugural meeting in October 2019 with a subsequent meeting in January 2020. And the Torres and Cape Hospital and Health Service, who would have been overseeing the health clinic, has attendance at all of these meetings, supporting the committee and continuing to assess the emergency medical response needs of the events local to that shire, which includes that event. Because I think they do have a couple of other events sort of throughout the year.
Through making sure that other events are covered just as well is always important as well. Just because something happened in the rodeo, they definitely need to look out for all the other events. And I'm sure there's lots of other towns within those areas or events within the broader northern Queensland that benefit from it.
Yeah. So, but this inquest was released in 2019. And so then obviously they went through that process of doing the committee and getting a plan and that sort of thing. The 2020 event was cancelled due to COVID. I'm not sure whether they would have had one in place this year. If it went ahead, it may not have gone ahead. And I would hope that even without the coroner's recommendation being put down in 2019, that from 2016 onwards, they did have a better plan in place.
Hopefully. I would hope so.
Like, surely after having that sort of traumatic event happen, that you would really take a look at what are we doing? How can we make it better? Because no one wants that to happen again. Like,
not at all.
You would put cost aside in that case and just say, okay, we're having QAS and everything.
Yeah. And hopefully, the community must have been aware, and so hopefully they would have rallied around to make sure that things were safe for visitors and that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, I would think so, yeah.
Right.
That's Holly's law.
I like it when something comes out of it like that. So sad, but
good that they can have some improvements in the future.
To prevent something similar happening again.
And if something does happen like that again, they've got the resources to be able to deal with it appropriately.
All right. Well, I look forward to the next catch up where we get to chat some more.
Thanks, everyone.
Good. All right. Bye.
Bye.